So the webinar will be recorded, but only the speakers will be spotlighted in the video. So welcome everyone. We're delighted to have you all with us today. My name is Leonor Sierra. I'm the Director of Communications and Engagement for Connecting Genetics to Climate. We aim to generate and support informed public dialogue about existing and emerging genetic technologies that have climate applications. We were founded by Dr. Ting Wu in the Department of Genetics at Harvard Medical School, where we are hosted. And really, we think that there's all these technologies that are being developed at universities and our companies that are based on different biotechnologies, synthetic biology, depending on the kind of the nomenclature, that really can maybe help. They can be potential tools to problems posed by a changing climate. And some of these technologies are already being trialed, and many more are under development. And we think it really will be up to policymakers, citizens, and many others to consider whether, how, and where we develop and implement these technologies. And we really kind of want to support this public dialogue. This is the second of a series of webinars that we are hosting bi-monthly. Our last one is available on our website, which is connectgenetics.org. And it covers, it was just kind of an introduction to kind of the field. And we will be planning some more. The next one will be in February. And we welcome, at the end of the webinar, we'll share a form with you, and we welcome your ideas to kind of help you, for you to tell us what you would like to hear from us, what topics that you're interested in and you wish that we were discussing. So today we are going to be talking about the regulatory landscape in the US and how the different agencies are involved. So the Coordinated Framework for Regulation of Biotechnology is the main policy governing genetic technologies in the US. And the EPA, the FDA, and the USDA all have specific roles defined in the Coordinated Framework. I will shortly introduce them all, but I will have to say that unfortunately, very last minute, just less than 2 hours ago, we just heard that the USDA representative is not able to be here today. But we do have a great panel of very experienced people from EPA and FDA. And after they do their intros and we have a starting discussion, you'll be able to ask them questions yourself. So with that said, I will basically start by introducing our first speaker. This is Mike Endelson. He's the Chief of Emerging Technologies at the Office of Pesticides at the EPA. And he will start by giving us a short introduction to the work that they do. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, and good afternoon and good morning, everybody. I'm the Chief of the Emerging Technologies branch at the Environmental Protection Agency, and we're within the Office of Pesticide Programs. We're involved with the regulation of pesticides, which includes the licensing or registration of a pesticide, the field testing of a pesticide, and other oversight, such as residues of the pesticide in food. And my branch specifically deals with emerging technology pesticides that are largely biotechnology based. We look at things like plant-incorporated protectants, which is essentially the biotech trait that has pesticidal properties in the plant, genetically engineered microorganisms that are used as pesticides, genetically engineered insects that are used as pesticides, like the genetically engineered mosquitoes, designer peptides and proteins, and also some spider toxins that are registered for use as an insecticide. We also look at double-stranded RNA that uses gene silencing as its mode of action. My group looks at both the risk assessment, we do environmental risk assessment and human health risk assessments, and the regulatory piece, which would be the pesticide registration and licensing. We also work on tolerance exemptions, which allow the residues of those pesticides in human and animal food. So that's kind of a summary of what we do.
Thanks, Mike. I'll come back to you with some more details about kind of the process, but maybe I'll kick it over to Gwen next. Gwen's also with the EPA, but she's in the risk assessment branch of the New Chemicals Division in the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics at the EPA. And when I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself and the work you do, and Morgan will share your slides.
Okay. Yes, I'm Gwen McClung. I've been in the biotech program in the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics for more than 30 years. I do risk assessments, ecological hazard assessments, even some human health. Yeah, been doing this for a long time. And I am also with EPA, but in a different office than Mike. I'm in Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics. Next slide, please. Okay, just a little background. We work under the Toxic Substances Control Act, and it gives us the authority to regulate the manufacture, use, distribution, and commerce, and disposal of chemical substances and mixtures. We also regulate genetically engineered microorganisms under TSCA. We cover things that are not specifically excluded from TSCA oversight. Next slide. Okay, and these are the things that are excluded from TSCA oversight. Food additives, that's FDA or USDA, drugs, cosmetic, and medical devices, that's FDA. Pesticides, of course, is in our sister office, the Office of Pesticide Programs, and also excluded is tobacco, nuclear material, and firearms. Next slide. Okay, we have a lot of different applications of genetically engineered microorganisms that fall into our program for our review. A lot of it is for closed system fermentation, for production of enzymes, specialty chemicals, and commodity chemicals. Right now, we are seeing a lot of biofuel production with genetically modified microorganisms, and that's mostly ethanol, but mostly cellulosic and corn ethanol, but also some algal biofuels. We'd also look at genetically engineered microorganisms that are used for biomass conversion or bioremediation. One other thing that's a very active area right now is biofertilizers. Actually, we've been looking at nitrogen-fixing microorganisms. Those were our first submissions way back in the 90s. A lot of rhizobia, bradyrhizobia, but now we're seeing other plant growth promoting microorganisms, many of which fix nitrogen, but also improve plant growth through various mechanisms. We've never seen a biomining application, but if there was one, it would come to our office. We've seen a number of biosensors, and we'd also review something for oil recovery. We haven't seen that. But TSCA covers biotech products not regulated by other agencies or the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics at EPA. Next slide. Okay, we don't regulate all genetically engineered microorganisms, only certain ones that we consider to be new. And our definition of new is intergeneric. And that's a microorganism formed by the deliberate combination of genetic material from organisms classified in different taxonomic genera, or a microorganism constructed with synthetic genes that are not identical to DNA that would be derived from the same genus. And of course, it's got to be something used in a TSCA application and not already listed on the TSCA chemical substance inventory. It wouldn't be new if it's already on the inventory. Next. We have two basic types of submissions for our genetically engineered microorganisms. Our microbial commercial activity notice, which is for commercial activity, as it says, and that is a 90-day review period before manufacturing or import can begin. And then we also have a TSCA experimental release application for those GE microorganisms that are intended to be released into the environment. including those at the R&D stage if it's deemed to be commercial research and development. That particular submission has a 60-day review period. Next, please. Back up one, please, to the risk assessment. Whoops. Yep. I just wanted to mention our risk assessments. We do risk assessments on these genetically engineered microorganisms under the paradigm that risk is equals hazard times exposure. We have a biotech technical team with people with various areas of specialty expertise. And we, for a standard review risk assessment, we produce 7 reports that all feed into a final integrated risk assessment. Taxonomic identification, of course, to make sure that the company or the person has accurately identified the microorganism. There's a genetic construction report that goes through all in detail, all the genetic modifications that were made to the recipient microorganism. There's a human health hazard assessment, and that looks at pathogenicity and toxicity and even allergenicity to the general population, but also now to potentially exposed or susceptible subpopulations. We write a ecological hazard assessment that looks at pathogenicity to plants and animals, and also potential microbial interactions. A construct hazard analysis, which looks at the inserted genes and the potential for horizontal gene transfer of that introduced genetic material to other microorganisms. We have an engineering report, which covers the use, worker exposure, and releases from the manufacturing facility to the environment. And then there's finally an exposure assessment that looks at consumer, general population, and environmental exposures. Next slide, please. I just want to give you a quick view of the activity in our office for biotech. We did our roll back in 1997, and we expected to get a lot of submissions. That didn't happen. For many years, we went along with just half a dozen submissions per year. If you notice, back in 2013, things started getting much busier. Some of that was algal biofuels. At that time, the Department of Energy was funding a lot of algal startups. So it was the beginning of algal biofuels, cellulosic biofuels, a lot for enzyme production, for the enzymes to break down the plant material, and also for corn ethanol. Anyway, it's been pretty busy. Last year was kind of a fluke, but I just wanted to mention that a lot of what we see are biofuel applications in the past decade. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gwen. Thanks for sharing that overview and kind of also the kind of like how things are changing. And our last speaker, for anyone joining us late today, unfortunately, the colleague from USDA has not been able to join us. He let us know this morning. But we will share in the chat what the USDA recently put publicly from their stakeholder meeting, in case that is helpful to anyone. But before continuing to further discussion, we have Adam Moyer. He's the chief of the Animal Biotechnology branch in the Division of Biotechnology at the FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine. So over to you, Adam, and I know we have some slides for you too.
Yes, thank you very much. I can share my slides.
Yeah,
if you prefer.
Yeah, that would be easiest, I think.
Yep. Oh, it says disabled. So maybe if you don't mind, that would be great.
You're all set now, Adam.
Oh, now it's enabled. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so my slides should be coming through. So I'll start, I guess, by noting that FDA regulates a very wide variety of products, including drugs, medical devices, and food. And this includes a variety of products of biotechnology, including both human and animal food from plants developed with genome editing or genetic engineering, as well as animals containing intentional genomic alterations, or IGAs. And so in my role, my group conducts the regulatory review for animals with IGAs. So my first slide here is just a really high level sort of explanation of what an IGA is. So this is any change introduced into an animal's genome using modern molecular technologies, including the more classic forms of genetic engineering, like integration of recombinant DNA constructs, as well as genome editing, like the CRISPR-Cas system. Typically, these changes are intended to have some form of an impact on gene or protein expression and result in some form of a desired phenotype in the animal. We look at a lot of different potential uses in our group of IGAs in animals, including those focused on improving human health, production of pharmaceuticals or organs or tissues for xenotransplantation, modeling of human diseases, as well as those that are focused on improving animal health and well-being or food production or quality. So some of these products, I think I kind of highlighted in red here, that might be focused on addressing climate change or the impacts of a changing climate. One such example that we've reviewed is the IGA in what are referred to as the PRLR slit cattle. These are animals that were genome edited to introduce a change into the prolactin receptor gene that results in truncation of the protein. This emulates mutations that have arisen naturally in several different breeds of cattle raised in the neotropics. And it results in animals with what's called the slick phenotype, and they have a shorter hair coat than their wild type relatives. And that's been linked to increased heat tolerance. We also approved an IGA in the Aqua Advantage salmon back in 2015. This is an IGA where it's a growth hormone that's been inserted from another species of salmon, and the resulting Aqua Advantage salmon reach an important growth marker more rapidly than Atlantic salmon without the IGA raised under equivalent conditions. So this is another approach that might increase the efficiency of food production, potentially having a positive environmental impact in the climate change arena. In very broad terms, our oversight objective focuses on the safety to the animal. Focuses on safety and effectiveness. And this includes safety to the animal, safety to anyone who consumes food from the animal. And when we say effectiveness, we really just mean that the IGA does what it's supposed to do and what the developer claims that it does. We also evaluate the environmental impact of products that we review. We have some sort of relatively complicated review processes that I'm happy to talk about through questions, but I didn't want to go too far into the weeds for folks, especially acknowledging time limits. And so lastly, I've included some helpful resources here, and in these, we go quite a bit deeper depending on your level of interest in animal biotechnology and IGAs in animals. I'd like to specifically highlight the Animal Biotechnology Products Resource Center, and I'll throw these links in the chat as well. But so on the Animal Biotechnology Products Resource Center, we have a variety of helpful resources, including a lot of different webinars that we've done that go through some case studies, including one on the PRLR slit cattle. So we go through that in a lot more detail, explaining what we looked at and our overall conclusions of that evaluation. And that's my last slide.
Thank you so much, Adam, for that. And I think Morgan's already put all those links in the chat for you, so they're in there. Fantastic. I'm going to ask you all to start thinking of the questions and start putting them in the chat, and then we will take them from there. But first, I have some questions to kick us off with the speakers. So my first question is to Mike. So you've kind of told us a little bit about the process, but how about and then we know that all agencies kind of coordinate, and there's the specific roles for different agencies. But can you set up out the process a little bit for someone that has a product and is a little bit unsure of who to approach or where to approach in the first instance, and how do you coordinate that? And also, if you have any examples you can share to illustrate this.
Sure. So I think certainly all of for coming to EPA would encourage to have a pre-submission meeting with us. So prior to making the submission and talking about specifically about the pesticide program, I'll let Adam and Gwen share from their perspective. But we would have a pre-submission meeting with an potential applicant, and those can be, conceptual, kind of at the conceptual side of things, or as they've developed the product more, they're getting ready to make a submission as far as the type of data that they need to submit to us to support that. We typically look at human health data as well as non-target organism toxicity data. And then after we've had the pre-submission meeting, then they would make an application through our Pesticide Registration Improvement Act, which there's some fees required, and we have a time frame to review that. But we have essentially a pre-submission email we would send out that would provide guidance to developers as far as the type of data they would need to develop. There is also the interagency website where you can post a question and ask about if you're not sure which agency it goes to, and to be able to get a response back that way. And you can, of course, always reach out to us, and I'm sure that Adam and Gwen might add as far as how they work together. But there is, I think, in the coordinated framework, there are some types of products that are just one agency, and there are other products where there's overlap between the agencies. So certainly that biotechnology website is a good source, and then also reaching out to the individual agencies.
And I know that Morgan also has put this tool that was for developers to answer questions about their product to determine which agency might regulate it if people aren't sure. The Sing Tree, I think that's like a tool to kind of help.
Yeah.
When Adam, is there anything you would want to add to that? Would you also want people to contact you first for a pre-submission meeting? Anything else you would like to say?
Yeah, we in the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics also very strongly encourage pre-notice consultation meetings. The earlier the better. We can talk, find out what you're planning to do, see if there's anything that raises a red flag. We very strongly encourage those. Very early on is better than later. But yes, I've already kind of given what we look at as far as our microorganisms and, health and environmental effects.
And actually, once you've done the risk assessment, I think this is a question, what is publicly available for people to see for stuff that you have already looked at? And where can people find this?
Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot publicly available. In our submissions, the company or individual has to provide us with a generic name and a generic use. But so much of our submissions are confidential business, claimed as confidential business information. Sometimes companies will actually give the genus name like Saccharomyces, but often they don't even do that. They'll say it's a bacterium that's, engineered this way or something. There's really not much to look at. I haven't gotten into this, but EPA has to make one of 5 determinations. And if the determination is that the particular microorganism does not present an unreasonable risk, then there is a place where those not likely to present cases are listed. Sometimes it has the genus and sometimes it doesn't. And that's only since 2016 when TSCA was, changed by the Frank R. Lautenberg Chemical Safety for the 21st Century Act. So we do list them. And there's a thing called ChemView, which sometimes lists them, but the only thing you get is the generic name. And so it's not terribly helpful to figure out who's doing what.
Thanks, Gwen. And I don't know, Adam, if you want to add something else, and then, but also I'll
Sure,
ask you
yeah.
the next question, and you can maybe cover them both together. So I was going to ask you, how does FDA stay on top of the latest research? Kind of what sort of lines of communication are available, which is kind of one of the questions that I think connects to the other one.
Yeah, so similarly to what Mike and Gwen both said, we very strongly encourage developers to come to us very early in the process, like the earlier the better. Before they have generated animals, that is great. We're happy to talk about what the regulatory process might look like, about any specific considerations, all of that. And that's one of the things that often we mention to people when we're sort of out on the road. So the way that we try to stay up on the science, in addition to hosting our own seminars where we bring in outside speakers and attending all sorts of virtual events, we try to go to as many conferences as we can. We have a pretty good mix of expertise in-house between veterinarians and animal scientists, chemists, molecular biologists, bioinformaticians. So they all try to stay up on sort of their areas and attend meetings relevant to that. And staying up on reading, all of that to the maximum extent possible. And when we're out in those environments, we try to engage as much as possible with the regulated community, encouraging them to talk to us about the process. And then I guess also answering the question of where to get information on our public webpage on IGAs and animals for approvals. Part of our process is that we publish a Freedom of Information summary, and that'll go through the information that we've reviewed. And so we use a risk-based approach where we don't expect applications for approval for all IGAs in animals. Some we do what's called exercising enforcement discretion for, where we say, based on a risk review that we conduct, we don't expect an application. So we review certain amounts of data. And for those, for certain products, we'll release a risk assessment summary. So we did that for the split cattle because it was the first of its kind. That was the first case where we used enforcement discretion for food use. The other types of products where we've used it traditionally have been for fluorescent aquarium fish, like glowfish that you might see in your local pet store, and animal models of disease that are used in controlled lab settings, like disease model pigs.
Thanks, Adam. I'm going to open it out to broader questions, and we're already getting some questions in. So Gwen, the first question is for you. You mentioned that your office has reviewed a lot of, so it's for Adam and Mike. So you have received you mentioned the biofuel applications that you had seen, but people were asking, maybe Adam, if we stay with you and then I'll go to Mike, kind of what some of the products with climate implications that you have reviewed or that you could potentially review that you kind of are seeing coming down the pipeline. You mentioned the short-haired cattle. What others might be some examples of this, Adam, and I'll send it over to you, Mike.
Yeah, so I think there are examples, of sort of increasing food production efficiency, like the Aqua Advantage salmon that I mentioned, where essentially you could raise an animal to market size in less time with less resources, with ideally, or desirably a potential positive environmental impact. We see applications or developers working towards disease resistance. So especially as climate changes and diseases are sort of spreading more rapidly in different parts of the world, that's addressed. Another sort of interesting one where I think there are potential impacts of climate change on a product would be the most recent product that we approved back in 2020 is an IGA in what's called the gal-safe pig. And this is a pig that lacks alpha-gal on its cell surfaces. And so folks may be aware of the red meat allergy that's called alpha-gal syndrome that happens after a bite by the Lone Star tick most often. And so the range of the Lone Star tick is changing due to climate change. So with that, more individuals are getting alpha-gal syndrome and are unable to eat mammalian meat products. So that is sort of targeting that audience potentially. It's not commercially available yet, but they've had great success with some of their initial marketing to consumers who are really interested in trying it. But there could be a lot of other things too. I mean, I'm sure Mike will touch on some of the mosquito things, I'm guessing, but we both have some interest in that space.
So would the mosquito one, and I'll let Mike tell us a little bit more about that. Would that be one of these areas where there's actually two agencies involved, like that have some overview over this, Mike?
Yeah. So for us, I think as Adam and you've mentioned, the mosquito products come to mind. We have the genetically engineered mosquito. We have an application in right now for one of those. And we also have already issued registrations for some Wolbachia-based mosquito products where these are ones that have the Wolbachia mosquito, the Wolbachia bacteria is in the mosquito and causes it to not be able to reproduce the same. So these are kind of like sterile insect techniques, but using either the Wolbachia or the genetic engineering to accomplish that. Now, it's important to note that EPA's focus here is on those applications that are for pest population reduction. And so Adam probably will speak a little bit to FDA also plays in this area. But again, just so for EPA, we're focused on those applications that are intended to impact the mosquito population level. Before I turn it back to Adam, I just want to mention also many of our transgenic crops, the PIPs that we look at, the plant incorporated protectants, by using a plant incorporated protectant, farmers often will not have to have as many trips to the field with their tractors. So those, of course, reduce the amount of diesel fuel that's necessary to grow that crop, and that's another impact there. But over to you, Adam.
Yep. So on the mosquito front, we evaluate mosquitoes that have IgAs, or actually we would also look at mosquitoes that have Wolbachia if the specific claims are about human disease transmission, for example. So like reduced capacity, reduced viral load, reduced ability to transmit one of the arboviruses, things along those lines. But we don't have any products to talk about that have gone through that process with us.
So you're saying you haven't had any yet, but you're expecting them to come, is that?
Yeah, I mean, we know there's research actively happening in this space. I can't talk about anything that we haven't made a decision on, so I can't say whether or not we have anything currently in-house, but we don't have anything that we have released any kind of a decision on.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Adam. And I mean, I think it's clear there's a question about how usual it's for like the three of you, or maybe with like also obviously with the USDA, to get together and have existing places for regular interaction. But I think it's clear from the way that you guys are responding in the questions, and that this is a regular thing, right? You guys have regular meetings, and this is also part of the process, right? That is with the coordinated framework, but also the update that is happening now with the updating to the coordinated framework, which is ensuring that it's clear who has regulatory oversight over a particular area and how to engage in this, and making sure that it is clear that these boundaries are clear. Would you say maybe Mike, and then if you want to touch upon that, and I'll move over to a question for one.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so that's right. And one of the commitments that we have in the regulatory reform document that was published as part of the executive order under Section 8 was a commitment to work on an MOU between EPA, USDA, and FDA on transgenic insects. So that's one of the commitments there in that report out.
And a question for you, Gwen, is there anything, I mean, you've kind of gone through kind of what the risk assessment process is, but is there any in the current review processes that maybe would address public concerns about like the accuracy of the product claims that might claim, even maybe what we would maybe say greenwashing is the question?
Well, actually, as I said, when TSCA was amended in 2016, our focus has changed. we used to be a risk benefit statute before the Lautenberg Act was passed. But now our risk assessments only consider risk and no other factors, no costs or benefits or anything like that. Our risk assessments are solely based upon risk. So, I mean, we do recognize that, you know, this biofuel or this biosynthesis using microorganisms to produce a lot of different products, you know, like surfactants or even textiles or that sort of thing, that it's more environmentally friendly than the use of diesel. And like the biofertilizer microorganisms, traditional nitrogen fertilizer is very, takes a lot of energy to produce it. And it's all fossil fuels that are producing it. So if we can get away from using chemical nitrogen fertilizer and let the microorganisms help meet the plant's needs, no, we recognize that as beneficial, but it doesn't go into the risk assessment considerations.
Thanks, Gwen. And
Okay.
we have a question now that I'll read it as this, and maybe then we can see what you can address on this. So the question is, given the potential shifts in priorities under the future presidential administration, do you anticipate basically any specific changes in the flow of resources or implementation of policies related to climate change mitigation, sustainable agriculture, and environmental protection? And also how this might affect the way you work together. So I'm guessing you're going to be able to say limited things for what's to come, but maybe you can say how it has been in the past and changes in the past. Adam, maybe do you want to take that question?
So yeah, I think I'm incredibly limited in what I can say. And I guess maybe it's also a somewhat interesting time to note that, so as some folks may be aware, I started my time at EPA and I was there from 2016 to 2020. And then I joined FDA in 2020. So I have sort of changed groups at the same time as administration changes. So I think I'm somewhat limited on before and after comparisons that way. But I think in general, at least FDA's stance on what will happen in the future is, you know, we'll take it one day at a time. And for now, it's business as usual, and we'll see what changes come.
So maybe, Mike, when you both have been at the EPA through some of the changes in the past, does the changes in administration lead to a lot of impacts, or have you mostly seen a continuation from administration to administration?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't really say. I'm kind of limited to what I can say. Sorry.
Yeah.
Now, us too. However, you know, maybe climate change or may not be important to the next administration. However, there's a worldwide bioeconomy initiative going on, and it's not necessarily related to climate change, but I think there's still going to be submissions from people with using genetically engineered microorganisms for a lot of different uses.
I have like a two-parted question, and it's about how does each agency interact or not with international stakeholders with respect to products that may cross borders, or is there situations where an agency does not get involved? For example, if a product is contained within an individual state or not crossing into different state, are there some things that are kind of outside of the purview, or is there also some international cooperation is the question? Mike, do you want to try and start that?
Sure. Yeah, certainly we cooperate internationally. I think everybody on the call here works with OECD, with other countries there as far as building consensus documents and risk consideration documents and such. We also support other parts of the U.S. government that are involved in trade and outreach that way. And I will say for the pesticide program at EPA, there are requirements for imports. So in order for a pesticide to be imported into this country, there's a requirement for a notice of arrival for most pesticides. So that's a piece of it there too. And also the residues of a pesticide in food, there has to be a tolerance or tolerance exemption that permits those residues in or on food. So if food is being imported from another country, it's important that that food has a tolerance or tolerance exemption allowing the residue of any pesticide residues. And those would include those emerging technology pesticides that I described earlier.
Adam, do you want to add anything from FDA's point of view?
Sure, yeah, we like to collaborate as much internationally as possible, especially acknowledging that animals do not necessarily inherently respect borders. That being said, most of what we see is for contained uses, at least in agricultural containment, if not even stricter for the type of biomedical uses that we see. But for products where developers want to commercialize in multiple jurisdictions, there are ways that we can discuss with other regulators if we get company permission to do so. We have to make our own findings under our statute, so we're not able to sort of share reviews. In the animal biotech space, there are some countries that can share reviews with each other, but we can't quite do that. But we've explored the idea of making simultaneous review pilots with Canada, for example, where we might both receive the same information and review it together, coming to our independent conclusions, but we haven't gone through that just yet, so we'll see. But yeah, we're always interested in collaborating more internationally, acknowledging that we work under our specific framework and need to make the appropriate regulatory findings under that.
So when you say you were talking in this case internationally that you don't share the kind of the reviewed information, is that also the case between agencies? Because of you wouldn't share if something has it has oversight with two of your agencies, you wouldn't each agency would receive individualized kind of applications or registrations, you wouldn't share it with each other. Is that correct?
So I think in a lot of ways that's true, but there is a bit of an exception, I would say, which is that in May of this year, we released a memorandum of understanding between FDA and USDA for IGAs in animals, where we actually are able to share confidential information. And so I guess as background to that, USDA has oversight of certain aspects of animal health, of meat processing and labeling, things like that, where there can be a lot of crosstalk with what we're looking at for the IGA and the animals. And so we meet with USDA monthly in a way that we actually go through product by product updates on what we're looking at for subjects that are of shared interest. So IGAs in animals of species that USDA has oversight of as well, if they're intended for agricultural uses. And in those cases, we do actually share submissions with them because we sort of put out this MOU saying that they will treat it confidentially just the way that we do. And that's a publicly available document as well that's linked on our website. But in general, we're not able to share the confidential information.
And I know Morgan has shared the MOU, so people can refer to that in the chat as well. And I think this might be for you, when this question, let me see if you might understand it better than me. So the question is, do analytical detection methods fall under the purview of these agencies? So for example, with PFAS detection be included in a program focused on remediation. So is this something that would come to you, for example?
If they've genetically engineered microorganisms for bioremediation in the environment of PFAS compounds, then yes, it would. Our OPPT, Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics, regulates chemicals, new chemicals and existing chemicals. So we would be looking at the microorganism, but our chemistry counterparts would be interested in the degradation of such compounds.
I guess
Yeah,
if it was something that could be ingested by cattle, for example, then Adam, your group would come in, right? If I'm understanding correctly.
Well, so my group only looks at intentional genomic alterations in animals, so I don't think that's a scenario. But there might be individuals that look at animal food and feed if it's going to be used in food or feed, which would be in the center that I'm in, but they're actually in a separate office.
Yeah. And how can the scientific community help support agency processes? How can the people here today, you know, work together with you all, support the work you do, continue to form closer relationships, maybe? Mike, do you want to start that one off, and I'll see if anyone wants to.
Maybe I'll defer to Adam to start that one if he doesn't mind. And I'll follow back.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. We're always interested in feedback and engagement. So we have, I think, some contact information put out there on our website if folks have any specific items to address out of, you know, maybe a webinar that we've released or other things. We also do some collaborative research. So we have a project going on with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, looking at characterization of genome editing methods. And that's another area where I think if there's feedback that individuals have on anything that we've sort of published, or just general questions or interest, we're always happy to field that. And then this past year, we also funded the creation of what's called Animal and Veterinary Innovation Centers, or AVICs. And one of those is a partnership with UC Davis, so a specific university, but and then they have some collaborators at other universities. But that's another area, although I mean, that was a targeted sort of, you know, grant application process that went through.
And I'm guessing that, I mean, obviously today we're talking about FDA, EPA, and USDA, but you all also talk to, I don't know, Office of Wildlife or NOAA or others that are also other bodies that will have some interest in some of the work you all are doing, right? When you're nodding along, do you want
to? We do interact with these other agencies as far as algae goes anyway, because there's an interagency algal working group, which has not only EPA, but EPA and EPA's Office of Water as well. But it is NOAA and DOE and NSF and a lot of representation from a lot of different agencies who are somehow active in the algal environment. That's been going on for a number of years.
maybe?
Yeah,
Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, so yeah, on the pesticide side, with biotechnology, we work with our colleagues at USDA with their BRAG grant program and serve as reviewers on those grants. And then I think, as Adam has said, we often meet at different scientific conferences and have discussions with researchers. But as far as, we have an Office of Research and Development that does a little bit, but for the most part, it's supporting the USDA grant program. As far as grant reviews, is primarily how we engage. And then, of course, we have a very robust public participation process. So for our registration decisions, we put our proposed, for new active ingredients, as we call them, we put our proposed decisions out on the web for public comment. We also, when we receive an application for a new active ingredient or a tolerance petition, we do notify the public for public comment. And so those comments are taken seriously. I do recall years ago when we were working on a new type of BT corn, we did get comments from those in research and academia as far as different types of insects to look at that we had not been looking at. And I also want to add, we do have scientific advisory panels on occasion when we're looking at some novel issues, and those also provide an opportunity for public comment and input into the risk assessment process.
So thanks so much for that. I mean, I think that kind of shows that there is a lot of things happening that connect not only the three of you, but also with other agencies, but also with the wider community at large. I'm just kind of curious. I'm sure that some of the attendees today have had experiences either engaging with you at either conferences or in a kind of a pre-submission process, or maybe even through a submission process. And is there, if anyone has anything they wanted to share, kind of like a takeaway that they took, or any learnings that they took from that engagement that would be useful to other attendees, I think that would be something that we'd love to hear about as well. Also, just to mention that we've got a little exit quick questionnaire for attendees, just to help us kind of make sure that we're kind of addressing the topics that people want to hear about. So that would be really helpful if you can follow that up. So I've got one more question coming in because they're putting it for me in the thing. So, oh yeah, maybe, and I will ask you the question to the three of you, but also maybe if you have anything to say about the question, but also then maybe anything you want to leave us with as we close the webinar today. So the question is, what are some of the examples that you think from working together in the coordinator framework that you think are good examples of successes, or where there were maybe in the past some redundancies that you think maybe have been addressed? That would be helpful to know. So maybe if I just go in the order I have you on my screen, Adam, Gwen, and Mike, and if you have any examples on that and anything else you would like to leave us with today, anything you would like attendees to know. Over to you, Adam.
Sure. Yeah, I hope it doesn't sound like a terrible cop-out answer, but I think to me, one of the big successes is the lack of redundancies. I think, at least from my relatively limited experience, we do have pretty good ideas of sort of what types of products go where, and we know how to discuss with each other when there are areas of question. And I think we try to keep things as smooth as possible in an area where obviously the science has changed massively in the last 5, 10, 20 years.
Is there anything you would, so that was a good answer to the question. Is there anything else that you wish that people knew about the work you do at FDA before we close?
I mean, I guess just sort of general understanding of how we try to ensure safety and effectiveness of this type of product. Understanding that they are evaluated and that we take a pretty in-depth look at things to make sure that IgAs in animals, whether they be intended for food or biomedical use, any of those, that they're well characterized, well understood, and safe. Thanks,
Adam. When, if you want to do both, take the question and say anything else you would like to leave us with today.
No, not really. I mean, the executive order is having us work together. The different agencies work together and cooperate. But and actually even address some areas in the coordinated framework. But no, for the most part, and an interactive tool was just developed for people who are producing biotechnology products, so they can figure out which agency they need to go to. And that interactive tool even highlights where there may be overlap. More than one agency can do that. Maybe I can come up with the website for that tool here, put it in the chat.
I think might have it and is about to put it in the chat again. So I think we've got you covered. So any final thoughts from you?
No, we just look very carefully at the microorganisms. One thing about microorganism release, environmental release, once they're out there, they're out there. You can't pull them back, rein them back in somehow. You can't sterilize the whole environment. So we rely very heavily on hazard assessment before we allow environmental introductions of microorganisms. But what we see are, for the most part, have just been rather benign type things. We don't have people who are using dangerous microorganisms to genetically modify for anything. So, but we do take a very, very close look at the potential hazards to human health and the environment, particularly with those microorganisms intended for environmental use.
Thanks, Gwen. Thanks so much. Mike, over to you for some closing thoughts, and then if you any successes you would want to highlight too.
Yeah, I would just echo what Adam had said about the, and appreciate being able to work across the agencies, and I think particularly on some of the genetically engineered animals with respect to those that have pest population reduction. We've provided some information through the plain language document with the EO and other pieces. So that's been helpful, and just generally just grateful to be able to work with my colleagues across the government that bring such innovation and insight to these things. And also it's always a pleasure to work with developers and the innovative products that they're bringing forward. I'm sorry, I have another meeting I need to jump to, so I'm going to have to close or leave, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Gwen. Thanks, Adam, for making the time, for being here today and answering the questions. We're also hoping we ask them some questions, and we will be putting all of these things together on our website. We will send it to all of you that have attended and anyone else that registered. So just a big thank you for me for being here. And if you are interested in the work that Connecting Genetics to Climate is doing, if you have suggestions for us, please reach out. I will put also, you can find our information on our website, but just in case, I will put my email in the chat, and feel free to send us any suggestions, any thoughts, apart from also you can use the chat. So join me in thanking our speakers today, and thanks all of you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Bye.